A Mohawk Valley ghost story next on Mohawk Valley Matters.
This is a public affairs presentation from News Channel 20 WUTR, Mohawk Valley Matters.
Happy Halloween. I'm John Swan. Normally each Sunday at this time we focus on an issue or issues of interest to the Mohawk Valley, but since this is All Hallows Eve, we thought perhaps this would be an appropriate time to focus on a subject which has always fascinated the human race, the haunting of an earthly place by the spirit of the dead. In this case, a place which goes by many names. Some call it Henderson House, others Cruger Mansion, still others Gelston Castle. It's a 19th century property in southern Herkimer County, outside the village of Mohawk, where the troubled spirit of Harriet Douglas Cruger is said to inhabit the crumbling remains of what was once the residence of a well-to-do family with roots going back to colonial times. The castle was intended as a tribute to Harriet Douglas Cruger's Scottish heritage. She wanted to be entombed in a sarcophagus in the castle's basement, but instead, because of her family's wishes at the time of her death, she lies in a Greenwich Village graveyard. Thus, so the story goes, her disappointed apparition haunts the castle she hoped would be her final resting place. So whether you believe in ghosts or not, we now present to you, through the talents of News Channel 20's Brandon Jakeways, a Mohawk Valley ghost story, The Haunting of Henderson House.
There's a whole body of information that you could come up with to discredit it all, but there's a lot of people around this area that have worked in their house over the years and different things and have had, you know, real eerie feelings and real eerie experiences.
There have been stories of her making noises. No one has ever actually seen an apparition. She's a poltergeist, we figure.
Poltergeist manifests itself in the movement of objects, noises. It never basically appears, you know, in bodily form to anybody.
Harriet called the mansion Henderson House after the original patentee, Dr. James Henderson. Some of the family also referred to it as Cruger Mansion. It was not until later years that the name Gelston Castle was added to the house. She oversaw the construction of the castle. It's built of sandstone blocks which were hauled here from Little Falls.
There's stories of dishes, of course, you know, being smashed and flying out of people's hands.
At the time of her death, she died in New York City, and in the 1870s it's very difficult to take a body all the way up here in the boondocks. So she was buried in a churchyard in New York City, much against her wishes.
She furnished this house, she set up this legacy of tradition, you know, and so it was also to serve as her eternal resting place. But that didn't happen.
So now she comes to the castle and visits.
What she's protecting as much as anything is her creation, what she put in place, what she built. And so as time goes on and the succeeding generations try to add things and change things, it's always met with loud noises, movement of objects, in some cases destruction of those objects, and the playing of the organ.
Harriet was born in 1790. Her grandfather was Dr. James Henderson, who was given a grant of land by King George II for his services in Greenwich Hospital in England. There was 16,000 acres in the original patent.
The whole area up here at that point in time when he received the grant was just pretty much wilderness. There was probably You know, maybe some trading going on, and fur trade was probably still, you know, being started. But for any kind of settlement or life, there was nothing, particularly for someone who was, you know, a surgeon and, you know, educated and of the sort of the gentry of the day. There was just nothing here.
Dr. Henderson actually probably never visited the area. His daughter and her husband built a small cottage in Harriet. Some people say she might even have been born here, but Harriet would visit in the summertime with her parents.
Margaret, her mother, is the one who builds the first place to stay up here when they do come visit. And that structure still is over on the property. In her youth, though, she did spend more time in Europe than she did here. She made several trips to Europe, so, and even when she was going to school, that was pretty much in Scotland, because, you know, the family was all Scottish and they wanted, you know, that tradition carried on. The money that her estate comes from was really developed by her father and his three brothers. It was an import-export business between the United States and Scotland and England. They had offices in London and Edinburgh, and Brother George, Harriet's father, ran the business in New York. He kind of becomes more Americanized than the others do. And so the others, they acquire, you know, these great lands and these little titles and so forth. George just has the money.
She loved this area, yes. This was her pride and joy. New York City was her home, but this was a special place in her heart. When her mother passed away, she paid the estate, I believe it was $14,000, because her mother had a stipulation in her will that if Harriet wished to purchase the property, she could do that from the estate. Her wish had always been to build a house on this. She was a rather domineering person. She was vibrant, lots of vitality. She was not afraid to tell you what she thought or do what she wanted to do. Might possibly a modern-day woman's liber.
She probably gets some of her strength too from just the extended family and the whole, you know, Scottish tradition. Well, they were very social. They had balls, they had cotillions, so there was a whole social environment that they would deal with. They also have relatives at different sites up the Hudson that they visit as well. And that's, as much as anything, where Harriet initially meets Henry Cruger, her future husband, is that they're neighbors to her cousin's estate at Boscobel. So when the Douglases came to the Dykmans for social events and so forth, all the neighbors would have been of the same social standing, would have been invited to whatever they were doing, and that's how they met.
She did not marry until she was in her 40s.
I think she decides it's time to settle down in some respects. I also think she's really decided it's now time to start this building project. She has all this in her head. She's been planning it for 10 years or better, because there's reference to it in one of her journals as early as when she was 21, that she wanted to build this souvenir of her uncle's estates here in the uncivilized New World. So, and her mother, when she dies, you know, leaves her tenant farms and the land to do it. So, and I think she's smart enough to know that in the mid-19th century, as a woman, she's not going to get people to work for her or under her. So she gets a husband.
And when, after 10 years of courtship, she married Henry Cruger, she began construction of the castle, which was patterned after her uncle's home in Gelston, Scotland.
Henry fit the bill. She had a husband, she had a lawyer, the estate gets settled, the money gets going in the direction she wants it, and then she can start getting a house built. So when Henderson House is being built, it's pretty much patterned along that idea of curved walls and limestone structure, and then the hint of moats with dugout sections around the foundation, and the idea of turrets with the chimneys, the way they're established.
It overlooks the Mohawk Valley. You can see parts of the Adirondacks through it. It's a beautiful view. It sits high, so there are always a wind, a breeze. It has round turrets, one large entrance hall, and the only mistake she might have made, or perhaps she did it on purpose, is that there's no main stairway.
She's not trying to build a huge castle. She just wants, because she also knows she's not going to live up here, all the time. This is, much as anything, is just a summer house. Henry, at one point in the marriage, wrote a little essay or a treatise of some sort of what he thought would be an idyllic life for them now that things had been settled out and so forth, that they could do travels here, they could have this life of ease and so forth, where they could just spend more time with one another and get to know each other in some respects. And supposedly Harriet scrawled across the top of this note or letter, "Much ado about nothing."
I'm not sure she ever loved him. They would both come to the castle to visit in the summer to spend time, but it was agreed that when he came, she didn't. When she came, he didn't. And one time she arrived and he was still here, and she was very upset.
There's not a whole lot of really strong information about Henry, but you're always, at least with family writings, you're always led to believe that he was probably pretty much a pretty boring, stick-in-the-mud type guy.
She, in her anger, she had the marriage bed sawed in half, and she ended up with 2 couches which grace the front hall of the castle. She was only married to Henry Cruger for 4 years.
And when they separated, basically, she just decided that she was going off on another trip to, another tour of the continent. And he didn't want to go. And she said, "Fine, I'm going, my brother William's going with me, and you can be gone when we get back." So she went, but he stayed, because he wasn't a dumb lawyer. So he was all prepared when she came back to be able to file abandonment charges against her, because he stayed at the house. She left him. He didn't leave her. It was supposedly the scandal of the mid-19th century, and Henry won.
She wanted to be buried here. Her mind in later years went. She was mentally unbalanced, and during one of these times, when she was very ill, she dreamed that there was a fire going under her bed, and the devil was there waiting to engulf her. And she decided the only way she could make sure that this didn't happen was to see that most of her estate and most of her money was donated to charities. At the time of her death, she died in New York City, and her will was contested and thrown out, and the estate was divided, and her niece inherited the property up here. Her will was contested after she died because they said she was not of sound mind when she made it. She did not want things to be changed. The way she had set them, the way she furnished it, she wanted it to remain that way.
Family always lists her, and most anybody I guess who's studied, you know, the ghost story, doesn't list her as a ghost as such, but as a poltergeist. There's a story of Helen Robinson trying to move one of Harriet's portraits and hang it at another point in the house, and every morning it would be on the floor, and she'd hang it back up again, and it would be on the floor. And after about a week of trying to get it to hang where she wanted it, she put it back where it was, and it never fell off again. There's a lot of people around this area that have worked in that house over the years at different things that have had, you know, real eerie feelings and real eerie experiences. And yes, there is the power of suggestion, and that does tend to help fuel those same ideas. One night as a kid, I remember being over there, and we were just sitting in the car, and like you'd see all the wind blowing the trees, and you know, it was a moonlit night, and you just sort of started to wonder what might be going on. Yeah, in 1979, the East Lake Corporation out of Syracuse, which I'm not even sure they still exist anymore, but they were an architectural restoration firm that contacted me as town historian and then the library because they had been hired by Mstislav Rostopovich, who had recently purchased the Gelston Castle Henderson House property.
What brought him to, I'd have to say, even New York State, but specifically to this area, was the Holy Trinity Monastery and Seminary in Jordanville. He came there to worship and to visit. He was the best cellist in the world, and his wife Galina was probably at that time one of the finest sopranos in the world. And it was on one of his trips here that the property known as the Henderson House or Cruger Mansion or whatever you want to call it was on the market. One of the monks recommended that he might be interested in it. So he, back then it was just a summer place really, so he walked back, and he was walking through there. It reminded him so much of old Moscow, and his homeland, that when he got over to the castle and whatnot, he decided in a matter of days to buy it. He immediately fell in love with the entire area, with the scenery, with the manner in which it was kept up, with the rolling hills and the view, and most important, of course, he fell in love with the castle when he saw it. His objective was to buy it and have the castle restored. When he bought the property, he did not know the history of the castle, except in a very generic sense, you know, that maybe some of the Roosevelts had visited there, that it was a replica of an old Scottish castle and a number of other things. But so far as knowing any of the detailed historical events or the personages who occupied the place, he didn't know that. But let me tell you, after he bought it, he grabbed and read everything he possibly could about the property, about the owners. He knew about the so-called sightings that were there.
When I was a kid, I knew all these stories. But I bet you go up and down the street right now, and any 9, 10-year-old, you ask them if they know Aunt Harriet, they'll look at you like you have two heads.
First of all, he had the architects look at the old building. He wouldn't settle for one. He had 3 independent architects look at it. they all told him it was beyond restoration, could not be restored.
They didn't grow up with the stories. They didn't have relatives that worked there, grandmothers who fed you this myth or ghost story. So they just sort of die out eventually.
He was disappointed that he couldn't fulfill that part of his dream in restoring the castle. And that's when he moved to Plan 2 and decided to build his own house for his wife and name it after her.
I think a lot of ghost stories and poltergeists, if somebody doesn't believe in them, they tend to just fade away.
There's an old Russian adage that whenever anyone moves into a new house, you must, the first night, find a stray cat, and the cat must spend the night in the house with you the first night to ward off evil spirits. He believed in that. We found the cat, and I spent the first night there. No, it was not a pure black cat. Kept us up all night. We just sat and laughed and drank.
I think right now, with the way things are, that poor Harriet just has been forgotten.